Welcome everybody. Today we have a guest all the way from Southern Africa, from Zambia, I believe. His name is Perseus. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Welcome Perseus to the call. And I think without much ado, I kindly introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to talk a little bit more. So my name is Perseus, one of the founders of Union54. We have developed an app called ChitChat, which is combining payments with messaging. So we look at the opportunity within Africa space as being the ability for people to chat securely to each other, as well as send each other funds without having to wait minutes or days for those funds to arrive. So we've just started to test ChitChat in Zambia, and we've got really exciting plans to take it across the continent.
All right, great. Thanks for that intro. This year's maybe also a bit of background about how you got into the fintech space, right? Like how has the journey been like?
Yeah, so I would say, like most people, I was an accidental founder. So I identified a problem which was really interesting to me, that I spent a few months just playing around with a few technologies. At the time, it was a Raspberry Pi. And the first thing that we wanted to solve was to give people the ability to communicate with a broader market base. So allowing smallholder farmers to list their products on the internet and allowing retailers to buy from them. But in the end, we never really solved that problem because it was too expensive. You need specialties in logistics, moving money, as well as just quality assurance on all the produce. So over the years, we've kind of just really adjusted our strategy. And now what we've settled down on is being able to combine payments with messaging, just because there are so many people from Africa who are now within the diaspora, and there are so many platforms which are being used on the continent where we don't necessarily have as much control as we should, just because this is really sensitive information. But I would say, accidental founder, and just really stumbled onto the opportunity.
Yeah, your story quite similar to other African entrepreneurs. And I think that's what makes, Africa unique and exciting. Maybe you can also break down a bit, because right now, with ChitChat, I think people are now getting familiar with products from Zambia, a fintech, such a great fintech product. Maybe you can tell us a bit on the product, ChitChat. How does it, for example, address privacy, security concerns, particularly, in the context of its recent, launch in Zambia?
Yeah, so I think more people are familiar with Zambian products than they are with Kenyan products. Outside of M-Pesa, do you guys have any startups that people might know?
Yeah, I think M-Pesa is obviously popular. A lot of the products that have actually been built, the successful ones, have been built on top of M-Pesa. So I think M-Pesa plays a huge role in the entire thing.
So what we want to do, if you look around at some of the things that are happening, you've got a really disparate ecosystem. So you might have people who are using predominantly American technologies, or even technologies from like Eastern Europe. And what that means is that when people are communicating, there is no data sovereignty. There is no guarantee that your rights as a customer or your rights as a user are being respected, because you're using a product which is not even in the same jurisdiction as you. So they might give precedence or give priority to people in their own domestic markets. And for us, this really represents a huge threat and a huge opportunity, because we're going into a new world where it's multipolar. You've got so many different competing interests. And I think we need to be able to, first and foremost, have the confidence and have the knowledge that the stuff we're saying to each other is secure, because if anything were to happen, we need to be able to continue our way of life. And that's not going to happen if A, we are using predominantly foreign-owned platforms to communicate to each other, and B, that's not going to happen if we're using predominantly foreign-owned platforms to be able to send and to route money. Like, as an example, if I wanted to send you $10 right now, can you think about a way that I would do that? And when would you get that money?
Yeah, interesting question. For me, what comes to my mind is how do I get the money via M-Pesa?
And I think for most people, it will end up looking like I have to physically leave where I am right now and go elsewhere and deposit that money either into a bank or into an agent. And you would have to wait. If you're lucky, you have to wait maybe 5 minutes. But if you're not lucky, you have to wait until a few hours has passed. And that's just not acceptable because people live extremely complex lives. You need to be able to respond to emergencies. You need to be able to communicate to suppliers. And this is the beauty of something like ChitChat, because we've combined the features of what people are expecting from a modern day fintech, as well as the features of what people are used to when they're using messaging platforms. So being able to combine those two things means that you end up with family who are abroad. We can easily send money as we're chatting together in the same messaging window. You receive that money, and it's extremely context driven because I can see what I'm responding to. So from a sovereignty perspective, I think this is something which is not being spoken a lot about right now, but over the next few years, it's just going to become more and more important because we've already seen the threats that come with using a platform which is responsible for routing a lot of money on the continent where you don't have any control or have any input. Other countries have just woken up and they have been told they can no longer participate using payment instruments like debit or credit cards. And overnight, you're finding yourself without the ability to buy bread or to buy fuel.
Yeah, thanks for that, Perseus. I think for me, yeah, I like that combination of a fintech product and something you use every day. I think that was quite unique. Talking about the product, you recently partnered with MasterCard. I thought that was quite unique as well for products. And I remember you are talking about developing a super app right before you announced ChitChat. I believe that was the super app. Tell us, how did that MasterCard collaboration come about, and how do you feel that benefits ChitChat and ChitChat users?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. Prior to ChitChat, we had developed a company and a product, Union54. And what Union54 had discovered is that for a lot of people on the African continent, they want to participate on the global economy, but they somehow struggle to do that. Mainly because if I want to get a debit card, I have to go to my bank. And if I have to get a card from my bank, it comes and I have to incur a lot of costs. So what that means is every time I want to pay for Netflix, I'm not just paying $9.99. I'm paying $9.99 plus currency conversion, plus my bank fees, plus the onboarding fees. And as a result, somebody in Western Europe would only be spending equivalent of $9.99 to subscribe for 30 days to Netflix. But me here on the continent, all in all, I'm spending about $13, $14. And a really unique way we solved that problem was to effectively allow people like ourselves to become card issuers. So we developed an API which did PIN sponsorship, which did transaction processing. So we could find a fintech who is properly regulated in any African market that is not under sanctions, of course. And we could give them the ability to issue cards to their own customers. So what quickly happened is that over a 9-month period, we issued over 3 million cards from quite a number of countries. And this really enabled people to transact on the internet without any restrictions, because the cards were easy and cheaper to get, and the cards were being operated and managed by a fintech. So they had less restrictions than you would get cards from a bank, which maybe don't work when you're trying to buy an airline ticket. So as a result of that experience, we had a really strong understanding about some of the products and the services and the competencies of a multinational company like MasterCard. And when we decided to stop the API in response to several threats that had happened, one thing that we kept coming back on was that it is still a viable business idea to connect people in Africa to more global opportunities. So what we always wanted to do was to really architect a unique and interesting way to be able to allow people here on the continent to continue with the trade that they're already doing on the internet. And this is where the idea of ChitChat comes in, because we have developed the core technologies, we're responsible for the security, but we also know that in order to become a really utility product, we do need to partner with people like MasterCard who bring in something from the table. So the partnership that we have, I think from our perspective, it allows us and our customers to be able to issue these cards to our customers so that they can transact again on the internet. They can use their card wherever MasterCard is accepted. And if you also think about the reality on the continent today, is that there are so many people who are studying in universities which are quite further away from their family or from their base, or even students who are abroad, and families like 5 million people from Zimbabwe are abroad in Canada, the States, what have you. So there's a lot of money which is coming back from Europe, from America, from Asia into the continent. And right now, the most expensive place in the world to send money to is Africa. So we see an opportunity for ChitChat to be able to have customers here on the continent, to have customers in the diaspora, so that when they're doing remittances via a ChitChat-owned route or route. And for us, that's incredibly exciting. So to be able to partner with somebody like MasterCard to understand some of the challenges that they have identified and some of the technologies they're employing to be able to combat some of these threats. For me, that's really exciting, because it means that when our customers are using our products, they're not using a substandard product, they're using a really competitive and a really global product.
Congratulations, 3 million is no small feat, to be honest. I think a lot of fintechs would love to be in your shoes. Most of them want to say we have 1 million users, 2 million. And I think, you have the privilege of saying that. So congratulations on that milestone. I think that's a big deal.
That was with our previous product, the Union54 API. It's not on ChitChat. ChitChat is only just launched in Zambia. But yeah, I take your point. It's not something that we take lightly. But again, it speaks to the importance of what we were building with the Union54 API, the freedom for people to be able to transact without having to call your bank like, hey, I'm going to Dubai tomorrow, please can you enable my card for transactions? So people can just easily do that on their phone. And for me, that was really exciting. It is something that I think we want to be able to continue doing.
Indeed. In fact, that you actually answered my next question, which was on financial inclusion. And clearly, I think what you have, delivers on that promise for the continent. On ChitChat, again, it's a new product, obviously. You are still working on it. What other features can people expect as you continue to build on the product?
I think for me, there's only like 2 or 3 main things that we're ever going to build. And number one is to give people a really beautiful way of chatting and keeping in touch with their families, and a really secure way to do that, where they know that Perseus and his team are behind this product. And that means something. That's a guarantee, right? And then secondly, the second most exciting feature that we can ever develop on ChitChat is, again, giving people a payment instrument where it says, you might be from Zambia, you might be from Kenya, but as long as you have been KYC'd on ChitChat, you can have a US dollar card. Because for a lot of people who are living in some of the markets where we want to go into, they always wake up really worried about their domestic currency relative to the US dollar. So for a lot of people, they're always checking, how much has our currency devalued? How much money have I lost? And that causes a lot of people anxiety that they can honestly do without. So if we're able to solve that challenge and give people a card where they can put $200 this month, $200 next month, and that allows them to be able to hedge or maybe just even transact on the internet, without being charged twice for conversion. That's a really beautiful outcome for us. And as somebody who's got family across the world, what I'm really interested in is being able to say, right now, Africa is the most expensive place to send money to, but thanks to ChitChat and its partners, it is now one of the cheapest places to send money to. So enabling those remittancy corridors. So if you're in the UK, you can send money over ChitChat, it arrives instantly. You're not being charged 20%, you're being charged 2%. For people who are working in supermarkets, in care homes across the world, that means that every little that they're sending home is actually arriving as they intended it. They're not just having their value eroding just because of using a payment platform. So those are the three key things that we're working on, and that's where we see the direction of the company. And that's where I think we're going to be able to unlock value for the company and for our customers.
Now, speaking of value, having been in the space for a while, having been able to, be able to onboard 3 million, card users, you have a process, right? There's a user engagement approach that works. I mean, again, I'm looking at this from an African perspective, where as much as Africa is leading, we know that there are still a lot of gaps when it comes to digital communications. How do you approach user, engagement and community building when you're for a product like this that you need to scale?
So interestingly, I would not consider myself as somebody who's great at community building. If you can hear some screaming in the background, it's my kids, so ignore them. So I don't think I'm really good at community building because I tend to shy away from public engagements. I would rather the product speaks for itself. And one of the things that I think we have been lucky to be able to do really well is to not be afraid to do experiments. So when we decided to stop the API in response to new challenges that were emerging at the time, we say to ourselves, we might have had a lot of customers, but we're still a startup. And if you're in the starting up phase, then I think it's okay for you to do multiple experiments and see what works best. So versus community engagement, I think our preferred approach is to get customer feedback. So being able to call people and show people some designs or some prototypes, being able to ask people to introduce you to their friends and their families and get really detailed feedback. So the process that we have is we might know what people might prefer, or we might be able to shape some maybe direction of the product, but ultimately it is up to the customer. So one thing that we do really rigorously is to look at the engagement metrics, what's happening on the platform, who's doing what. And for us, that tells us where the value is being created.
Thanks for your honesty. Speaking of challenges, Precious, we know that one of the biggest challenges facing fintechs on the continent are regulatory challenges, either a lack thereof or just very strict, non-friendly. Now, for a product like ChitChat and Union54, how do you navigate regulatory challenges? Maybe you can let us know in Zambia and then maybe the rest of the continent.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for Union54, I've spoken about this a few times publicly, but we're doing something which was primarily financial services. And Zambia at the time was the best market for us because unlike other markets in the region, it had demonstrated since independence in 1964 that the central bank had always been its own independent and its own independence functions, and it had its own direction that it always pursued. And for us, that gave us confidence that we could build something. What we really wanted to do over the long term, more than just issuing cards, was to develop Zambia into becoming like a treasury hub. So we could attract multinational companies who maybe want to have some businesses in Africa, but they don't really know how to start doing that. And you offer them a really clear jurisdiction. They know that there is respect for the courts, that there is independence in the central bank and they can really base their funds here. So that was always the long-term vision. How can you develop, as well as the fintech products, how can you develop these treasury functions from a market like Zambia? But for the new product that we have, what we're really looking at is maybe it's not so much the independence of the central bank, but it's more about the openness of the market itself. Is it a market that we can recruit people from Nigeria, from Kenya, from South Africa, from India, and they can easily get visas and come here? And because it's a platform, is it a country or is it a market where our employees feel they can say whatever they're saying without breaking the law or without abusing anybody, without worrying that they're going to get arrested or we can get hauled in? And I would say, lastly, one of the things that we're really concerned about is it a market that respects that this is a young company? What it looks like today is not going to be always the case. So I see your point about some of the markets having challenges with regulators and regulatory environments. But in our case, always being able to explain that this is where we are, this is what we want to do, and this is some of the advice that we are looking for, has always just really allowed people to be more open and just really spending time trying to understand what are they trying to solve for. It tells you maybe there are things that regulators cannot say, but they can read about. So I would say in that regard, Kenya and Zambia are not so different, because I think personally, it's going to be either Kenya or it's going to be either Zambia that over the next 25, 30 years becomes like the hub for the continent, because we're kind of like thinking about this directionally the same. I think Kenya is a little bit ahead right now, where they have introduced the startup bill and they've simplified some of the processes around paying tax, and they're making it easy for people to come in by removing the visas. These are some things that markets like Zambia have thought about but haven't yet actioned. So we're kind of losing the momentum a little bit on that front. But it's early days, and I think ultimately it's going to be between Kenya and Zambia. So let's speak again in 20 years and see who's won it.
I'm not gonna wait that long, but yeah, I'll definitely reach out and see progress. But and I appreciate the fact that you're also quite conversant with the regulatory space on the continent. I feel like a lot more fintechs or fintech founders need to understand, so that we can maybe someday we'll have a very standardized regulatory framework for the continent.
I think it's already starting to happen. So if you look at some of the startup bills, like they tend to follow each other, like Nigeria, Kenya, and then the other followers. But yeah, I think that would be ideal, because it means that if you're a company, you don't have to worry about having a compliance person in 6, 7 different markets, because you know what applies here is going to be blanket approved in all of those other markets. But correct. That's the dream, right?
Yep, that's a dream. That's the dream. All right, so Perseus, as we wind up, you can let us know, where do you see ChitChat? Where do you see Union54 in the next 5-10 years? How do you look at the market, and what will be Union54's contributions to that space maybe 10 years from now?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the world in which we live in is changing a lot, and it's changing quicker than people realize. And as it changes, I think it's going to become more pronounced that what worked 5 years ago is not always going to work. I think there should be more conversations around some of the sovereignty of the platforms that we use, some of the securities that consumers are signing up to and enterprise customers are signing up to. And as a result, that should force regulators in Africa to be more connected, to work together to solve for some of these things. So if there's a contribution that we make, I think it should be for pushing that agenda and giving people a better alternative to messaging, a better and a safer alternative to moving money. But more importantly, I think it should be around reducing the fees that people pay when they're doing remittances. So those 3 things, I would say that's what we want to do really, really well over the next 10 years.
Indeed. So now, before I let you go, Precious, for people who want to learn more about Union54 ChitChat, where can they go to? How can they reach out?
You can find more about the company on union54.com. So that's union54.com. And you can see the URL for ChitChat connected there.
Right. On social media, where can people find you?
On ChitChat HQ across all social media platforms. On ChitChat HQ. So you can find us there. But I would like to think that if you just type in ChitChat Africa, it will be one of the first things that comes up on your search.
Thank you so much, Precious, for talking to us.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'll see you in 20 years for that bet.
Definitely. Thanks.
All right. Speak soon.
Cheers. Cheers.